Valerie Ihsan, story analyst and podcaster, is the author of The Scent of Apple Tea and Smell the Blue Sky, Young, Pregnant, and Widowed. Winner of a Bragg Medallion for top indie published books, and she hosts the Writer Craft podcast. Some days she is a bookseller in an independent bookstore, and other days she analyzes and diagnoses manuscripts and helps memoirists find the core of their stories. She loves dogs, sugar, and Costa Rica. Please welcome Valerie.
Okay, so I'm going to be reading a couple of pieces from my upcoming memoir, which is called You Can't Dance a Lie, Writing, Lying, and Love, a memoir. So that's coming out January 1st, so I thought I would read a couple of pieces from the different parts of the book. A teenager in a cult. Organized religion didn't make people lie, but perhaps it was my personal reaction to it. Like chemically, religion and I didn't mix well. The constraints and shaming created a toxic off-gassing in me, and I lied to myself and therefore to others around me. I grew up in the Jehovah's Witness cult in a small freeway town off I-5 in the Willamette Valley, surrounded by the Cascade Range, the Oregon Coast Range, and the California Mountains. 3.5 decades ago, in the early 80s, we had a temperate climate. The summers would rarely go over 93 degrees Fahrenheit, and snow was a miracle in the winter. I saw it twice as a child. But we sure had our share of rain, good for rhododendrons and keeping summer grass green, but not fun for playing outside and climbing trees. As a witness, among other things, I wasn't allowed to make friends outside the congregation. But when I did anyway, the elders came one night to scold me, instructed me on the error of my ways. I think that was the day I started lying. How did they even know I was friends with Jolene? We hung out at school in between classes and at lunchtime and wrote each other letters. I spent the night at her house maybe twice. I went shopping with her once. We were in 7th grade. That night, Brother Houston and Brother Grover showed up to our ranch-style home on the corner of 31st and Geary Street in Albany, Oregon. It was just getting dark outside, and my mother closed the living room drapes. The baseboard heater below the window cast a warm current, and the heavy polyester swayed. Maybe Brother Houston's daughter, Peggy Sue, a year ahead of me in school, tattled on me. Maybe her mother saw Jolene and me at Mervyn's buying clothes with Jolene's mother. The elders sat across from us, my mom stiff on the couch next to me. I wonder now if she'd been embarrassed, mortified. I bet she was furious. But not with me. Probably she was both, one emotion tripping over the other, igniting the other. I shoved my hands between my knees, my insides a roiling mix of shame and defiance. Brother Houston tilted his body to the side, one hand on his knee, making room for his large belly. How was your family, Sister Todd? One of the suits asked my mother. He oozed with fake concern. That's how I read it. I knew why he was here. It's none of his business who I'm friends with. Except he thought it was. He was a shepherd tending his flock. I was the one causing disunity in the congregation with my behavior, showing up as a bad influence. We're concerned about Valerie. Choosing to associate with people that aren't members of our faith goes against Jehovah's will. He wants us to be no part of this world, Brother Houston said. We understand that the need for community and friendship is strong in the youth, Brother Grover said, but it is for all of us. There are many children in the congregation that can fill those needs for you. He turned to me and waited. My dad was watching TV in the family room on the other side of the wall, behind me. I couldn't tell which show was on. Do you promise to end your friendship with Jolene? Brother Houston said. I looked at my knees and bit the inside of my cheek, holding my breath. The couch cushions were old and soft, just how I liked them. How dare he? Heat rated at the collar of my polo shirt. When I was in elementary school and the report cards were handwritten, one of my teachers had said I was a bit of a smart aleck. My dad had words with me then. He liked respectful children that reflected well on him, but probably Dad would have had a different set of words to say to these brothers if he could hear us. Instead of mouthing off, I mumbled some assertion of acquiescence. Lie. I just wanted the elders to leave. Truth. And they did, proudly nodding to themselves. Another job well done, another soul saved. I felt a huge dissonance growing up. The things that interested me, learning French, traveling, going to college, dating, were not the things that I was taught I was supposed to want, like spreading the good news, only going out in large groups of peers with chaperones, dedicating my time and energy and future to God and not wasting it with worldly things like careers when I only needed to make enough money to get to Armageddon. Since the brothers watched me for future transgressions from then on, I dutifully and tearfully explained to Jolene why I couldn't be friends with her anymore. Peggy, the only other girl that I was close to in age from my congregation and went to my school, refused to be friends with me until I fully abandoned poor Jolene and showed restraint from talking to her for at least 2 weeks before Peggy would deign to sully herself with me. I don't know why she thought 2 weeks was sufficient time to stop caring for someone. Maybe she thought that was enough time to punish me. Maybe middle schoolers thought that 2 weeks was forever. It certainly felt that way to me. A 2-week forever hell of no friends. And since the witnesses didn't believe in a fiery torture chamber hell, that when you died, you just stopped, blank, nothingness, that's what it felt like. No Jolene and no Peggy, nothing. I read a lot, did my homework, started a diary while lying across my waterbed. And because I was terrified of being shunned by the only people I was allowed to hang out with and didn't really know what I would be missing anyway, I readily agreed to sign away my future and baptize myself to God. It seemed, at 14 years old, the right thing to do. And I liked being a Jehovah's Witness. Lied. All my friends were Jehovah's Witnesses. Lied. I liked being a good girl. Lied. Well, sort of. Becoming a Jehovah's Witness meant no college, no reading philosophy or other religions, reading only approved literature, nothing with fantasy, magic, or other satanic influences, and going door to door on Saturdays to spread the good news. When I was 16 and 17 and still a virgin, I did absolutely everything I could think of that wasn't actually sex, or rather intercourse, as the JWs called it. My first boyfriend, Eric, and I had some pretty silly stories of not having sex. We did the next best, still dangerous, don't get caught stuff that only 16-year-olds raised in cults would think of. Like driving around in my car naked. Not touching, just driving, naked, and laughing. We did lots of rubbing up against each other with Eric readjusting erections trapped in his jeans. One time he wore sweatpants to my house and there wasn't much readjusting needed. He just poked straight up and out, so I climbed on. He picked me up and I wrapped my legs around his waist, dry humping. I had 0 period in high school, which meant I went to school an hour before everyone else and got off an hour early. An empty house for a whole hour was magic for horny teenagers. We took a shower together one time. That was a close one. Because, you can't fornicate. That's the bad thing. We snuggled under blankets in dark rooms and watched movies while he'd touch me, apparently under friendly eyes who ratted us out to the elders of the congregation until we were shunned enough that few of the congregation came to our wedding the following year. One time while riding home from a ski trip with my family, I rested my head in Eric's lap under a blanket. How could my parents not have known what I was doing? They had to have. Mom and Dad were up in front in the rusty blue Chevy Suburban. My 2 younger sisters sat in the middle bench seat and Eric and I were in the very back. I wasn't actually blowing him. That would have been too obvious, but during our play, I took a big slurp of Diet Pepsi and let loose the soda, letting it dribble and sizzle down his penis. His whole body stiffened and he grabbed my arm. I sat up, stifling a manic giggle. Did I just come? He said, his eyes huge. The witnesses also taught that women, specifically wives, were not the heads of their household. Their husbands were. And while husbands and wives should always respect and love each other and make decisions together, the final decision would always live with the husband as the head of the household. Hearing this repeatedly, I gotta to breathe. Hearing this repeatedly while growing up meant I learned that not only did I not get this final say in anything, but I also wasn't allowed to have my own opinions without being ostracized. I had to hide everything about myself. And what kind of a shitty future was that for an adolescent? So to combat the shittiness, I told myself I preferred it that way. I told myself it was my idea, and thus began my journey into lying. I lied all the time. Not to get my own way or to look good, Oh, maybe that one. But I lied to fit in. I pretended I was someone that I really wasn't. I didn't want to go door to door on Saturday mornings and tell people they were going to die in a lake of fire if they didn't read the Watchtower and the Awake magazines. I didn't want to only associate with a small pool of people that I didn't particularly like just because they were on the approved list. And I really, really didn't like shunning the people I most wanted to connect with because they were of a different religion than I was and therefore considered a bad influence. But I didn't want to get disfellowshipped, shunned myself. So I did as I was told, telling myself that actually I preferred it that way. Lie. Whenever I was unhappy in a relationship, I just pretended I wasn't. That's what I did. It was how I was raised. It's what I grew up believing. If I wasn't happy where I was and I wasn't allowed to be where I wanted to be, then the only way to be happy at that point would be to pretend that I was. Pretend so hard that I believed it. In retrospect, I'm sure that's how I lasted so long with Paul. I believed I was in love with him. Okay, this is a really short one. It's called Creative People Feel. I had writer's block, but not the regular kind. It was self-induced, sort of. I was looking through some old content on my blog the other day and recognized a certain openness that didn't seem to exist there anymore. And then I went to Facebook, and the same was true there too. I wasn't posting in either place. Or I was, but in a vanilla sanitized way. Not too emotional, not too raw, not too edgy, not too real. Was I losing my voice? Was I fearing judgment? Were too many people looking? I used to search for ways to display my character, to illustrate and demonstrate what the real me was like underneath the stage persona. I put all of me out in cyberspace for anyone to see. It was a living lesson in letting go of my fear of judgment. But now, I was censoring myself. Even in this simple way, this not putting photos up on Facebook anymore, this not writing about my crazy-ass emotions anymore. Why? It smacked of dishonesty, self-dishonesty. I didn't feel like I was lying to others by not sharing what was going on in my world, but I felt like I wasn't being honest with myself, and I promised myself that. No more lying to myself. It also felt that as I wasn't owning my emotions, like if I didn't document my fears and worries and joy and love, they didn't exist. And I wanted to live all my emotions, even the crappy ones. I wanted to own them and examine them and feel them and, yes, write about them. Tell the truth to myself about myself. Maybe I could do that in a private journal, and I did, but in some big way that was also small, I felt that a person's emotions were their art. And the telling and showing of those emotions that could so easily get caged inside was, in fact, also art. Of course it was. When I looked at a painting, what I saw was the artist's emotions, or at least their opinion about something. Even if it was a portrait, emotion was still present in the eyes and facial features of the model. The artist had painstakingly captured the other's emotions, told the truth of their existence. And that was all I wanted to do too, tell the truth of my emotions, express myself from the inside out, because that was all that art really was at the bottom of it, telling truths and stories. Even the lies of fiction had truths in them. So why the writer's block? Unfortunately, there was no interesting epiphany. I already knew the fucking answer. Plain old boring fear. Fear of being judged for my words, experiences, feelings, judged by strangers, by people who said they were my friends, by my real friends, by my children, by my family, and by my lover, all of them. Creative people feel, a friend once said. They feel deeply, and not just about the good stuff, but about the other stuff too. She didn't think that most people understood that or wanted to. They just wanted to look at the pretty stuff after the feeling deeply part, the part that actually made the art come out. I thought she was right. And maybe I was just acknowledging that truth, if it was one, and was loath to show the feeling deeply part before the art comes out. That was it. My certain brand of writer's block for this past year had been the afraid of showing the feeling deeply before the art comes out part of creativity. And when I looked at that fear, I slammed the door shut quick and deadbolted it. And really, how could art come through that? I guess there was an epiphany there after all. All right, we're gonna do one more. You either get Cuthbert acid trip or a Jane Austen day?
Cuthbert acid.
We've all had Jane Austen days. Okay, sharing an acid trip is personal on so many levels, especially one with some distance behind it. It's been many years since the Further show at the Cuthbert Amphitheater, and I don't recall the nuances of my time under the influence of LSD. What I can tell you is that it changed me, helped me to move from one stuck area to a more expansive place. I was one thing before and another after, which is often the case with acid, which is why it was taken. It was a medicine of sorts, and new and old studies showed that microdosing helped with a whole slew of mental, emotional, and psychological issues, from PTSD to quitting smoking. On this occurrence, this trip, I learned to trust Ali. Not that I didn't before, but our relationship, in my mind anyway, went to a whole new level of trust. I was mostly able to feel in control of my body and mind and surroundings that night, but increasingly I found that I wouldn't be able to get home on my own, given the state I was in. And for some clouded reason, I was fearful of this, shaken. I knew I could call for a taxi, but the thought of consciously finding the phone number and talking to a stranger and communicating where I lived was a quest I just didn't have in me. I was trapped there, and that sharp and pointy realization felt glaring and harsh. I don't know how I'm gonna get home, I said to Ali. Don't worry, babe, I'll get you home. But I can't drive, and you can't drive. That's okay, I'll be fine by the time we need to leave. He squeezed my hand, and if not, we'll take a taxi home. What about the car? We'll come back and get it tomorrow. I'm sure they're used to cars staying in the parking lot overnight. I think we had this same exact conversation, almost verbatim, 3 more times that night, until I let go. I let go of being in control. It clicked, like the clarity on the meadow that one day during my text conversation with Nazim. I could trust Ali to take care of me. I could put my life in his hands, and he would be brave when I couldn't. He would guide me when I needed direction. I could trust him, period, in all things. I wept with relief and understanding and giddiness and love. I knew I'd made it through another level of trust and depth with Ali. I was euphoric. I relaxed into the rest of the evening and danced and walked and looked and saw and danced some more. Before that night, I felt confident that I'd gotten truth down. Honesty with myself was easier and easier, but sometimes it came out defensive. Here, my truth. Take it if you can stand it. Are you strong enough? And after Cuthbert, I could soften into trust, knowing Ali would be gentle with my truth and honor it. He was a rock. He could stand it. He could stand me, and I reveled in the newness of that.